The coffee was still warm. That was the first thing Vera noticed when she walked into the kitchen that Tuesday morning. The coffee still warm in the pot. 2 cups set out on the counter. Everything neat and deliberate, like a stage set for a life she no longer recognized. Her husband had been gone since before she woke up. His side of the bed cold, his car gone. But the coffee, warm, waiting, as if he expected her to stand here and pretend nothing had changed. She poured a cup anyway. Old habit. Vera Langston had been married to Joel Langston for 9 years. 9 years of building something she believed in. A home in the east side of Columbus, Ohio. A career she'd carved out of long nights and longer mornings as a financial auditor at Mercer & Cole. And a marriage she thought was solid in the way that old houses are solid, weathered but standing. She was 38 years old and had spent the better part of her 30s pouring herself into 2 things: her work and her husband. She had not yet learned that some foundations are hollow. She found out about the woman the way most wives do. Not all at once, not with one clean blow, but in pieces, slow and accumulating, like water damage you keep explaining away until the ceiling caves. It started with a hotel receipt in March. The Grand Portman downtown, a Tuesday night. Joel had told her he was in Cincinnati for a client dinner. She'd believed him. She'd been working late herself, buried in a quarterly audit, and when he came home the next morning smelling of a cologne she didn't recognize, she told herself it was from the hotel gym. People used hotel gyms. It was a reasonable explanation. She was good at reasonable explanations. Then came April. A name on his phone that appeared too often. Sasha. Always late at night, always when Joel thought she was asleep. She asked him once casually who Sasha was. He didn't hesitate. A colleague from the Chicago office, he said. Works in acquisitions. She's been CC'd on some of our deals. Nothing interesting. He said it the way he said everything. Smooth, easy, with just enough detail to seem credible. Joel Langston was, above all else, a man who understood the architecture of a convincing lie. By May, Vera had stopped asking questions and started paying attention. She noticed that he checked his phone under the dinner table. She noticed that he'd changed his password. She noticed that twice in 1 month, he came home after 2 in the morning and blamed a poker night, a client emergency, traffic on 270. She noticed that he stopped reaching for her hand when they watched television together, the small, quiet gesture he'd done for years without thinking about it. She noticed the absence of that hand like a missing tooth her tongue kept finding. She did not confront him. Not yet. She was a financial auditor. She knew better than anyone that you didn't walk into a room and accuse. You gathered your documentation first. She hired someone. A private investigator named Henry Doss came recommended by a woman in Vera's professional network, whose ex-husband had tried to hide assets in a business dissolution. Henry was quiet, thorough, and had the demeanor of a man who had spent 20 years watching other people's worst secrets surface, and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. He told Vera he'd have something for her within 3 weeks. He had something in 11 days. The folder he brought to their meeting at a coffee shop in Westerville contained 37 photographs. Sasha Pruitt, 31 years old, a marketing coordinator at the same firm Joel consulted for. Brunette, pretty in an uncomplicated way, with a laugh Vera had heard once on a voice memo Joel accidentally played aloud before fumbling to silence his phone. The photographs were ordinary in their devastation, the 2 of them at a restaurant, her hand over his on the table. Leaving an apartment building on Morse Road at 7 in the morning. Grocery shopping together at a Kroger 3 neighborhoods away from home. Ordinary things. The kind of things you did with someone who was yours. There was one photograph Vera kept coming back to. Joel opening the passenger door of his car for Sasha. The same gesture he'd done for Vera on their first date. The one she'd told her sister about. The one that had seemed like such a clear signal that he was the kind of man who paid attention. He was, apparently, still that man, just with someone else. She drove home from that meeting and sat in her parked car in the garage for a long time, not crying. She wasn't ready to cry yet. She was thinking the way she always thought when a problem revealed itself, methodically, from all angles, looking for the load-bearing wall. Joel didn't know that Vera had spent the last decade auditing financial statements for companies that tried to hide things. He didn't know that she understood, down to a cellular level, how deception worked. The small inconsistencies that compounded, The paper trails that people thought they'd erased but hadn't. The way money moved when someone was trying to move it quietly. What Joel didn't know was that in the 6 weeks since she first found the hotel receipt, Vera had been doing what she did best. She had been auditing her own marriage. What she found was not pretty. Joel had opened a brokerage account in his name only 8 months ago. He'd been redirecting a portion of his quarterly bonus, not enough to notice on a monthly budget, but significant over time, into that account. He'd also, she discovered, begun conversations with a real estate agent about listing their house. Their house. The one Vera had put her entire down payment savings into. She found the email thread buried in a shared cloud folder Joel had apparently forgotten they both had access to. The subject line was simply, "Next steps." She did not confront him. She called a lawyer. Rebecca Foss was a family law attorney, whose name Vera found through the Ohio State Bar Association. She had 22 years of experience, a no-nonsense office in Bexley, and a habit of letting long silences sit after she spoke, so that her words could fully land. When Vera laid out everything, the account, the real estate conversations, the photographs, the timeline, Rebecca let one of those silences sit for a full 10 seconds before he was planning to leave you with nothing. Not a question, an assessment. "Yes," Vera said. "Then we're going to make sure that doesn't happen." They worked together over the course of 3 weeks. Vera provided documentation she had quietly gathered. Statements, transfer records, the email thread, the investigator's report. Rebecca filed the divorce petition on a Thursday morning in late June. Joel was served at his office at 11:45, in front of 2 colleagues. Vera was at work when it happened. She did not see his face. But she heard about it later, from a mutual acquaintance who described how Joel Langston, composed, unflappable Joel Langston, who never lost his cool in a client meeting, who had once talked a room of hostile investors into a unanimous vote of approval, had gone completely still when the process server handed him the envelope, like something in him had just switched off. She hoped it hurt. That evening, Joel came home. Vera was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and her laptop. She'd been expecting him. She'd been expecting this particular conversation since before she ever opened that folder from Henry Doss. She had rehearsed nothing because she had learned that rehearsed conversations almost never went the way you planned them, and she was done planning around Joel Langston. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a moment, just looking at her. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before, a kind of rawness underneath the composure, like he was running the calculation on how to play this and coming up short. "You didn't say anything?" he said finally. "No," she agreed. You went straight to a lawyer. You went straight to a real estate agent," she said. "While I was still living in this house. So." He sat down across from her. He set his hands flat on the table the way he did when he was trying to look reasonable, trying to steer a conversation like a negotiation. She watched his hands and felt nothing except a clean, tired clarity. "I know I've hurt you," he started. "Joel." She said his name quietly, without heat. "I didn't come to this table to let you explain yourself. I came to tell you that I have legal representation, that my attorney has already filed, and that any further communication between us should go through Rebecca Foss." She slid a business card across the table. "That's her number." He looked at the card. Something moved across his face. Not quite anger, not quite grief. Something more complicated. The look of a man who had spent months maneuvering and had just realized the board was set up differently than he thought. "You knew," he said. "You knew for a while." "I suspected for a while," she said. "I knew for 6 weeks. 6 weeks." He repeated it like he was trying to find the edges of it. "You should go stay somewhere else tonight," Vera said. "I've already called your brother. He's expecting you." Joel left an hour later, a bag over his shoulder, and Vera sat alone in the kitchen for a long time. The house was very quiet. In the quiet, she let herself feel some of what she'd been holding back. Not the theatrical grief of movies, not the collapse she'd half expected from herself, but something slower and more honest. A mourning for the years that had been real before they weren't. A grief for the version of Joel she had loved, who had either never quite existed or had been eroded by something she still didn't fully understand and no longer needed to. She poured the rest of her water down the drain and went to bed. The divorce proceedings moved forward. Joel hired his own attorney, a man named Douglas Price, who had a reputation for aggressive negotiation, and for the first 2 weeks the communication between the two legal camps had the particular temperature of people who were sizing each other up. Vera did not attend those early exchanges. Rebecca did. Rebecca, who had 22 years of experience and the quiet confidence of someone who genuinely enjoyed this part of the work. What Joel and Douglas Price did not fully account for was the documentation. Vera had been meticulous. The brokerage account opened 8 months prior, with a balance that had grown quietly to just over $90,000. Funds traceable to redirected marital income. The email thread with the real estate agent, time-stamped, demonstrating that Joel had been in active conversations about selling the marital home without Vera's knowledge or consent. The hotel receipts, the private investigator's report, photographs and records that established not only the affair but its timeline relative to Joel's financial maneuvering. When Rebecca presented the full documentation package to Price, Vera was told there was a long pause on his end of the call. She could imagine it. Joel's position shifted. The bravado that had characterized his first round of demands, a 50-50 split of the house equity, a limited claim on his brokerage account, spousal support that would expire in 12 months, began to erode as the scope of the documentation became clear. What had seemed, from his side, like a manageable situation, started to look less manageable. Through it all, Vera went to work. This was perhaps what surprised people most. Her colleagues at Mercer & Cole, her sister in Pittsburgh, the few friends she told. They expected her to be devastated in a visible way, to take leave, to come apart at the seams in the particular fashion that betrayal was supposed to produce. Instead, she was at her desk by 8 every morning. She completed 2 audits during the period of the proceedings. She went to her Thursday evening yoga class. She ate dinner with her friend Carmen most Fridays, at a Thai place they both liked on Fifth Avenue, and she talked about the divorce the way she talked about complicated accounts, with precision and without theater. "I don't know how you're so calm," Carmen said one Friday, over green curry. "I'm not calm," Vera said. "I'm focused." Carmen studied her for a moment. "There's a difference? One of them is a feeling," Vera said. "The other one is a choice." What Vera didn't say, because it would have sounded strange or maybe too honest, was that the grief was there. It came in its own time, on its own schedule, with no interest in her preferences. It came on a Saturday morning in July when she found a birthday card Joel had written her 3 years ago, tucked inside a book she hadn't opened since. It came on a Wednesday night, when she drove past the Italian place on Broad Street, where they'd eaten on their anniversary every year for 6 years. It came at odd moments, the grief, but it came quietly, without the drama of ambush, and she let it pass through her the way weather passed, acknowledging it, not fighting it, not drowning in it. She was not the woman who stayed in bed. She had never been that woman. But she understood now, for the first time with any real depth, how close she had come to becoming someone who didn't know she had a choice. The preliminary hearing was held in August. Vera sat beside Rebecca in a courtroom, on the 4th floor of the Franklin County Courthouse, in a gray blazer she'd bought specifically for occasions that required her to look like someone who was not to be underestimated. Joel sat across the room with Douglas Price. He looked tired. He looked, she thought, like a man who had miscalculated something significant and was still working out exactly what. She did not hate him. This surprised her. She had expected to hate him by now, and the absence of it was strange. Not peaceful exactly, but clarifying. What she felt, looking across that courtroom, was something closer to distance. The feeling you have when you see something from far away that was once close enough to touch. The judge reviewed the documentation. Vera had come to understand, through the months of proceedings, that the law was slow and procedural and often frustrating, but that it also had a certain satisfying logic when the documentation was solid. It was not so different from auditing. The numbers either supported the narrative or they didn't, and when they did, the conclusion was hard to argue with. Douglas Price argued with it anyway. That was his job, and he did it professionally. But the brokerage account was there, with its transfer history. The real estate emails were there, with their timestamps. The investigator's report was there. And Rebecca, who had 22 years and seemed to genuinely enjoy this particular moment in proceedings, laid it out with the patient precision of someone who had done this many times and would do it many more. The judge asked Joel, at one point, directly, whether he disputed the account of the asset transfers. Joel said carefully that he had opened the account as a personal investment vehicle and had not considered it a marital asset. The judge looked at him over her glasses for a long moment without saying anything. Then she looked back at her papers. That moment, Vera decided, was almost worth everything. The final settlement came in September. The house went to Vera. She bought out Joel's equity at fair market value, financed through a refinancing she'd already been pre-approved for before the proceedings concluded. She had planned it that way. The brokerage account was divided, with the portion traceable to redirected marital income, designated as marital property. Spousal support was set at a term and amount that reflected the 9-year marriage and the economic disparity created by Joel's deception. It was not a perfect outcome. There was no such thing. But it was a fair one, and fair was what Vera had asked for from the beginning, and she had learned not to underestimate the value of getting exactly what you asked for. Joel signed the final papers on a Thursday afternoon. Vera was not present. Rebecca called her at 4:30. "It's done," she said. Vera was standing at her office window, looking out over Columbus in the early autumn light. The light that came in September when the heat had finally broken, and the air had the quality of something beginning. She watched the city for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "You did most of it," Rebecca said. "I just organized it." After she hung up, Vera stayed at the window a little longer. Not because she was processing some dramatic realization. Life rarely delivered those, she'd found, with any real neatness, but because it was a nice afternoon and she was allowed to just stand in it. She heard later, through the mutual acquaintance who had seen Joel's face when he was served, that Sasha Pruitt had ended things shortly after the settlement. She heard this without particular satisfaction and without particular surprise. She did not know if it was true, and found that she did not especially need to know. What she knew was smaller and more useful than that. She knew that she had looked at her own life clearly, when it would have been easier not to. She knew that she had made a plan in the middle of grief, and carried it out without losing herself in the process. She knew that the house was hers, and the coffee in the morning was hers, and the quiet evenings were hers, and the strange, terrifying freedom of starting again was hers too, complicated and unwanted, and hers regardless. She thought about the morning this had all begun, in a way, standing in the kitchen, cup in hand, a life that had been running parallel to a lie she hadn't fully named yet. She thought about how long she had looked at the coffee and told herself reasonable things. She didn't make that mistake anymore. These days, Vera Langston woke up early. She made her own coffee. She sat by the window she'd had reframed after the refinancing, the one that let in the east light in the morning, and she drank it slowly, not waiting for anything, not pretending. Just there in her kitchen, in her house, in the life she had chosen not to let be taken from her, steady, clear-eyed, and entirely her own.